My name is Bill Heeter. I'm a longtime fan, a first-time caller. And we're interviewing Don Norwine today. We thought for the center it might be fun to talk to some collectors. So we went back and tried to find the oldest one we could find, and Don's name popped up. So we brought him on board, and Don and I met the first time, well, maybe 20 years ago, 25 years ago or so at one of the special client events that LJ holds, and Chuck was there, which is a big thrill for us. But um, I think we had attended a couple events together, but really hadn't really met. And I know this sounds unusual, but we actually met at the bar, as I recall, and chatted then. So, Don, can you tell people a little bit about what brought you to the event and your interest in Chuck? And let's start with that.
Okay, well, Chuck, to me, I've known Chuck my entire life just based on when you look at when I was born on either side of that, things like Zoom and Board, Duck Amuck, Duck Dodgers in the 20th, all of those, what I consider to be kind of, what's Opera Doc, the classic cartoons of Chuck Jones and actually animation in general. And so growing up, those were always the things that especially someone with ADHD loved. They were, 6 to 7 minutes. They were just long enough to where I didn't get lost in being bored that open start a cartoon and the dearest mother's not coming back. In a Chuck Jones, animation, the coyote's always back. The coyote goes through the ringer, and the coyote's always back. And I love that kind of animation.
He is a resilient
Well, and,
sort,
and
isn't
all of
he?
the Chuck, when you look at Daffy and the things that would happen to Daffy when, especially with the shotgun, right? I mean, you always knew nothing bad was going to happen. And it was just
Yeah.
classic enjoyment in a very, what I consider to be a much more free form style. And I love that type of animation.
Don, what do you remember the first time you met Chuck?
I do very vividly. The first time I encountered Chuck Jones art, Diane and I were driving down Pac Coast Highway. I think we were going to La Jolla or San Diego or maybe Tijuana. I don't remember exactly where, but we were heading south. And we got to Corona del Mar. And, Diane was driving and I looked up and I saw the building with the yellow awning. And in the
Oh yeah.
window were all of the animation cells. And before I could really say anything, Diane slammed on the brakes. I hit my head on the dashboard, did a U-turn, parked the car, we went in. And that was the first time I went into the Chuck Jones and actually bought my first cell, which was a Grinch Shaking Max. And after that, uh, we were at the gallery several weeks later, and Chuck wasn't there being there. He just stopped in. And that was the
Oh,
first time I ever met Chuck in person. As far as meeting concerned, I said hi, and he introduced himself, and that was as much as I could say because I was now standing in front of the Chuck Jones, and so I like babbled for a second and then faded into oblivion. But that was the first time I ever met him, and then in the client events were the times that we actually got to interact with Chuck.
did you find him intimidating or daunting when you conversed with him?
Uh, well, yeah, but
I mean,
that
he
could
is
be
an
just
icon, but still.
he was. And that's the problem, right? I would feel that I probably would have felt the same way. I met Walt Disney when I was 9 because he was a very good friend with my grandfather. But when you're 9, the only thing that intimidates you is I was talking to a guy that owned Disneyland, and that was the coolest thing on the planet for me. But when I meet somebody like Chuck, somebody who's kind of otherworldly in famousness, I can't help but be a bit intimidated. Yeah, I was very intimidated because it was Chuck, but not because Chuck treated anybody
Right.
in a demeaning manner. He was very congenial. He was very conversant. I mean, he was just, you would listen to him and it was just a joy to listen to him. And you knew you were kind of moving through history with an icon. And it was, that to me made it intimidating for me, but not the encounter itself.
Yeah, I found him very approachable, very affable, good, wonderful sense of humor. I think to me, I was a bit daunted by his intelligence. When as well read as he is, and
Yeah.
the guy could practically recite word for word every Mark Twain book ever written, and That was daunting, but certainly he didn't try to be intimidating. He didn't try to be intellectual. He's just a smart guy.
Right. Well,
Um,
and the funny thing to me is when you would think back on all the times that at the gallery during one of the events, and Chuck would show up and he would take his seat, and everyone in the room would get down on the floor and sit cross-legged like all the kids used to in kindergarten, and you
yeah,
could not hear anything except Chuck as he just walked through some historical events or something in the life of animation. And the people were just, you would look around and the people were just
yeah,
dumbstruck. And that's the power of Chuck. He just had the ability to just captivate you with his life in animation.
yeah. You hung on every word.
Absolutely.
Um, I remember seeing him a couple times. One time, he was trying to discuss a rotor and a coyote gag, and he wanted to draw, but there was no easel or sketch pad or anything nearby. So he grabs a magic marker, and there happened to be a white sliding door there, and he drew the rotor and coyote scene in front of everybody on this white door.
Yeah, it was
Now,
a
I
Corona
probably would have done that when I was 3 years old,
and gotten yelled at,
but
right? That was a
yeah,
Corona
that
Del
was his
Mar.
gallery.
That was the door at Corona Del Mar that he did that on. I actually have pictures of when he was doing the drawing. And I
Yeah.
think a number of us went up and put dots on it, but that didn't work.
And you had one particular incident where you commissioned a watercolor from him.
We did, hold on just a
You
second.
and Diane did. So you got to
This
tell us a
is,
little bit about that.
you already know what my favorite movie is, so I'm going to go ahead and take that off. So we were at I guess it was Laguna. Yeah, it was Laguna, 1999, in fact. And Chuck was doing some commissions. And so we went up to our consultant and said, yes, please, we would like that. And so I decided to get two of them. One was a drawing and a one-on-one cell, and the other was the Grinch and Cindy Lou Who. And we sat down with Chuck, and it was Chuck, and then Diane sat next to Chuck, and then I was on a stool next to Diane off to Chuck's right. And Chuck started drawing, and we were talking, and the when you
I
watch
have to
Chuck
stop you
draw.
for a second. I have to stop you for a second, Don, because this was being also projected on
Oh
an
yeah,
overhead for the rest of the audience to see.
right. Everybody could see what was going on. Um, so and he started drawing, but the almost the entire time that he was drawing, he was looking at Diane and I and having a conversation. So his hand was kind of gliding through the efforts of this, and I'm pretty amazed, and I'm trying to make small talk, and I know it probably was fairly banal what I was saying, and everything that Chuck said was really just amazing. And at one point, he got to Cindy Lou Who, and he was, how he always kind of drew the little rough, and then he would pencil in. And he started drawing, and I looked down and I thought, well, that just looks like Charlie Brown's head. But I thought that. I was also
Yeah, yeah,
smart
I
enough
was
to
going to
say anything
say,
because who am I, right? If he wants to do Charlie Brown, I'm fine with that. And but he was talking to Diane and I, and he's drawing, and all of a sudden he looks over and he looks at the paper and he looks down and he goes, well, that's not right. And he takes his eraser and he erases the entire head. And he went back and he drew over it. And when he finished, it was pretty much profile spot on model of Cindy Lou Who.
and that took a grand total of 10 seconds, 15
Oh,
seconds.
max. I mean, once he finished erasing, he had that new penciled in and went back with the line work over it, and he just moved on from there. And it was quite really quite
Yeah,
amazing because I thought, oh well, okay, I have nothing to complain about now.
yeah. And it became a watercolor for you. He
Hmm.
afterwards he kept it and painted it. And
Yep.
did you have any there was a time when Chuck did cells. And I know personally, I mean, from his own personal um, avocation, I guess he would do watercolors and he would do oils. But when he started to transition and do the Warner Brothers characters in watercolors and oils, was that a surprise to you? Did you take to that quickly? Or did you kind of go, I'm not sure I understand this?
No, to me, it was not so much as an animation collector. I have people that say, well, if it's not a cell, it's garbage. If it's a limited edition, it's garbage. If it's one-on-one, it's garbage. We want production cells. To me, it was more about the art. And, if you walk around the house, I think I have a watercolor hanging up here behind me of gossamer and bugs, and I've got a couple out in the entryway. And I love Chuck's earlier watercolors that he did, and I thought they were just as good to me as the production cells and even some of the one-on-ones.
I've actually migrated over more towards the watercolors. At first, I don't get this. I don't understand this. This isn't a cell. And
Yeah,
then,
you were that guy I argued with, probably.
yeah, probably. And then the more I watched or looked at them and, went back multiple times, and I thought, this is really interesting. Again, as I've said many times, I can't draw a stick person. So
Yeah.
the fact that he can translate these characters from sketches to cells to watercolors to oils was spectacular. I think one of the most vivid memories I have is seeing that huge oil he was painting. He was actually working on two of them. One of them was a Sherwood Forest group. Do you remember
Hmm.
seeing it on the back
Yes.
wall? It was enormous. It was probably the largest one I've seen him do. Um, and I was just fascinated by it. Just incredible ability. And I've learned to love his live art or fine art, I guess I should call it as well. Have you migrated over to that? Do you collect any of the fine art as well?
I have some. I never pursued it as much because I'm more I like the cartoon side of life. And while I
I would
appreciate,
never have guessed that.
yeah, I knew that would throw you for a loop, but I thought I'd throw it in there anyway. But I do like it, and I do have a few, but and it's not that I don't appreciate them. It's just that if I was going to get something, it would probably be something screwy, just like me. It would be some kind of cartoon art.
Yeah. The any thoughts about some of the other directors? Have you collected art from Frizz, from Tex, from Bob Clampett, those folks too?
I think I have a piece by Tex, and you.
Yeah, the one you're willing to me, right? That one?
Yeah, yeah. And that one is really kind of an interesting piece to me. It's not really an animation, but it's a drawing that Tex did back in 1932, and I think that was the same year he lost his sight in his right eye. And if I was a betting man, I would bet that this probably predated that incident just based on the line work, because afterwards, after that incident that in the studio where the paperclip went in his eye, yeah, his line work kind of changed. And and that's how you ended up with kind of the wolf and all of those things that just had a different kind of structure to them. And but this is really a kind of a neat piece. And I do have quite a few that Frizz did. I like his animation as well. And then there's other studios that I have a great deal of animation from, but most of those are just based upon the fact that I really, really, really liked some of the animation in one of the sequences. For instance, I have a lot of Disney, a lot of it from Sleeping Beauty. Well, I did that because I knew Ron Diaz, who did a lot of the backgrounds for it. I knew Mark Davis and Alice Davis and Mary Costa. Oh, by the way, shout out to Mary Costa, who just celebrated her 95th birthday 2 days
Wow.
ago. And so, um, and by the way, Chuck actually worked on that. But
I didn't know that.
yeah, I think there was I had read this and I think Floyd Norman indicated this to me once before, but there was a 4 month period of time in the early 50s where Chuck went to work for Disney. And he did some preliminary stuff on Sleeping Beauty. And I think he was only there for 4 months, maybe, but don't test my memory on that. But I think and basically, I think he found it as soul crushing as could be, because Chuck was, he didn't like the structure, as evidenced by a lot of his animation. His animation tends to be very flowing, very spontaneous, and Disney animation is anything but that. I mean, it's like
Precise. Yep.
it is absolutely just boom, boom, boom. We're going to start here. We're going to get here. We're going to end here. This is the way it goes. And Chuck's was kind of like, let's go this way real fast, and oh, maybe we'll turn right or left and go to Albuquerque. We don't know. And so then he went back, and I guess he got back with Warner Brothers when they abandoned their hope that 3D was going to be the thing, and said that wasn't going to work.
Yeah, yeah. And errors repeat themselves too, don't they?
Yeah, but it's, the other side of that is if you look at the Disney, the Disney, what I'll call the Disney classics, the top 10, the Sleeping Beauties, the Bambis, all of those, look at the run times of those movies. I mean, they're 75 minutes. I think Fantasia is 126 and some change. I mean, these are investments in time to sit and watch one of those things. If you look at Chuck's work, I think the longest thing that he ever did might have been um gosh, what was it? It was the Bugs Bunny Roadrunner movie in 79. And I think that was 79, 80 minutes.
But that wasn't all original. They interspersed a
Right,
lot.
right.
Yeah.
But that's kind of the outside of that. And then you go back and look at um at the greatest cartoons. I think Jerry Beck actually put out that book of the 50 greatest
Right.
cartoons, or put it out. It's kind of a compendium of a lot of animators chipping in their 3 cents
Sure.
worth. But in the top 10, four of those slots are occupied by Chuck Jones. You look at
Including number one, I believe.
which is
What's opera?
What's Opera Doc. That's
Yeah.
exactly right. I mean, that is probably the gold standard by which short animation will be measured forever.
By the way, don't
And
put me on the spot like that again. I, you know, you
well,
can, I got one right. That's about my track record right there.
whatever you said, I was going to agree with and just go from there. So you're kind of safe there. But interestingly, it was kind of back when I was very young, my mother said, you can take life saving or you can play piano. And I said, I don't like to swim and I don't know anything about the piano, so I'll do piano. So she took me to this piano teacher who I think had originally dated Mozart, but I'm not sure. And I got there and she said, what kind of music do you like? And I said, um, and I hummed something. She goes, oh, you like Wagner? I said, yeah, whatever. Because I had hummed the Ride of the Valkyries, right? And so I went through some of those, and some were probably from Rabbit of Seville, or and so she would pull, oh, Rossini, you like Rossini and Van Stub, and she's naming off these people. I'm going, yeah, those are exactly the ones I like. I guess I don't know. And so I learned to play classical music on piano. And now I realize it was because of the music in Chuck Jones cartoons,
Yeah,
was
and
the
again,
music that I loved.
it goes back to how brilliant he was. It's just amazing. You talked about the length of things that he's done in terms of his productions. And one thing that always amazed me is I love the anecdote about how tight Leon Schlesinger was. And there was no room for extra length to anything. There was no editing. Man, this cartoon had to be 6 minutes and whatever seconds, and no screwing around with that. And Chuck just learned the ability to do timing. And I remember, I think he was talking to Steven Spielberg or someone, and they were just blown away by his ability to piece that all together with no excess and come in spot on. I think that
Yeah,
was a pretty fascinating thing.
yeah, it really is to be able to see, because on the other commission that we had done, it was we sat down and Chuck said, what characters do you want? And I said, well, I love Canine, Marvin, two of my favorites. And how about Bugs? He goes, okay. And I said, and how about if there? He goes, got it. And that was basically all I gave. And he was like, got it. And he set off with the knowledge of those three characters. And when he finished, I was like, oh, this is amazing, because off in the distance they were on, I think he drew them on Planet X. And in the
Mm.
distance there was the Earth. And in the Earth, there was the outline of the state of Texas. And in the state of Texas, he put a little star and wrote Plano, which is where we're from. And he got all that from Draw Bugs, Marvin, and Kane.
Wow, that's pretty amazing. I think one of the other things that fascinated me is how he evolved, starting out with, and I'm not talking about the cell washing and that kind of stuff, when he actually was doing the cartoons, doing things like Sniffles, very sweet, very cute, almost Disney-esque. And then something changed, and all of a sudden there's a little bit of sarcasm and more action, and he was kind of the contrarian to Tex, where Tex, the eyes are, oh God,
Right.
this kind of thing. And Chuck, I don't have eyebrows, but if I did, one would go up like that. Chuck was very subtle about that. And I enjoyed his transition as he got more, shall I say, animated. I don't know how else to
Yeah.
describe
Unsniffled.
it. Sniffled, yeah, exactly. Exactly. Well, we've covered a lot of things. Is there anything that you wanted to say about Chuck or anybody else or LJD or
I,
Linda?
I'm not 100% sure what else to say about Chuck other than, meeting him probably overall in the world of art for me, certainly was, sits at that pinnacle, um, probably above meeting Walt Disney. I mean, I just think that from a significant standpoint, while Walt was obviously fairly significant in the world of animation, I know where they kind of rank Chuck, but certainly I think he's ranked overall lower than I would put him, because when you look at his body of work, you can't find an animator in
No.
Disney or Hanna or any of those other studios that created the number of characters, right? They were given characters, and they animated many characters on some of those. But when you look at Chuck, somebody asked me once, well, how many characters did Chuck actually develop? And I said, and I took a guess. And they said, oh, wow, that's a lot. And they went away. And I thought, well, I wonder. And I started going through some of the cartoons. And when I got to like 40, I stopped counting. And I went and did some research. And I came up with like 75, 78 different characters that appear in his shorts. And I think, nobody in the history of animation has ever developed that kind of body of character work throughout a career. They may
And they
have
were
worked on a lot
unique.
of those. They absolutely were. Pepe Le Pew, Wile E. Coyote,
Yeah.
Daffy Duck. It's just it's amazing when you look at those. They weren't like, okay, let's just make a little change and it'll be a different character. But I mean, they were just wildly different.
I think I'll close with one comment, and you'll remember this. Don and I were fortunate enough to meet June Foray several times. And she was so gracious and complimentary about Chuck. She feels she owed a lot of her career to him. And she said he was always respectful. They had a great admiration for each other, but she just loved working with him because some of these directors would say, okay, another take, June, another take, June, another take, June. Chuck would say, June, do it. One or two takes, it's done. And she apparently just thought the world of him, and I think so do we, I guess.
Yeah, she was a real firecracker. I remember the first time we met her and one of the last times that I was over at her house. And I think that that was a real special, to me anyway, another special thing to be able to interact with her and to hear her side of the Chuck Jones
Right.
legacy, as well as the things that we knew. Because the other thing that sticks with me, and I can't remember whether it was Scott or Craig that was standing there. But when Diane and I were talking with Chuck one time, and I was saying something about the way he draws characters, and he says, "Well, anybody can draw." And I said, "Well, no, I can't." And he said, "Well, I can teach anyone to draw Bugs Bunny." And I said, "Well, don't make a bet that you can't cover, because
Yeah.
that's not the case." But the other interesting thing is, and I don't know, let me tip this. I don't know if you can see up in the very top, there's a Gossamer charcoal.
Yes, we can see
Okay,
it. Yeah.
so that charcoal was one that I had a chance to uh, talk to Chuck about when we picked it up at.
That's the original, correct?
It is an original charcoal,
Yeah.
and it's done on orange paper. And what Chuck did was took the black charcoal and just scraped away things until it was gossamer. And when I was talking to Chuck, I know I wanted to say, that's an incredible use of negative space and blah, blah, blah. But I probably said something like, wow, that's really cool. You got gossamer to come out of the paper like that. And he goes, he just looked up and said, gossamer was there the whole time. I just had to scrape away the things you didn't need to see. And I thought,
Yeah.
what a simplistic view. Because he looked at a blank piece of orange paper and he saw gossamer. and I looked at a blank piece of orange paper, and I was lucky that I saw the orange paper.
By the way, I do have to say that I have done some really nice stick figure Bugs Bunnies. So if I can,
Really?
yeah, if I can draw, anybody pretty much can, I guess.
I doubt that, but
Well, thanks for taking the time, Don. Always just a blast to talk to you, and thanks for sharing it with our folks here.
I am very happy to. I'm very happy to share anything I can, especially with Chuck. He's been a very important part of my collecting life. Probably well, not probably, absolutely the cornerstone of all of the animation that I own can be attributed directly to Chuck Jones and the things that he's done. And I've always enjoyed that. I've enjoyed the people that I met along the way, and I've enjoyed being able to say to the people that I meet in the future, Chuck Jones, oh yeah, I met him.